Prior to his untimely demise, Randolph Scott's agonizing secret was made public. Scott Randolph was born. George Randolph Scott was born in Orange County, Virginia, on January 23, 1898, before relocating to Charlotte, North Carolina, where he spent the majority of his childhood. He was raised in a prosperous Southern family. Because of his family's privileged upbringing and his father's work as a textile executive, Scott was able to attend esteemed schools. Before enlisting in World War I, he briefly studied engineering and business at Georgia Tech and the University of North Carolina. It was during this time that he gained the quiet self-assurance and discipline that would later characterize his on-screen presence. Scott was unsure of his future when he returned home after the war, but he was motivated to relocate to Hollywood by a fortuitous encounter with movie star Howard Greer. His life was profoundly altered by that choice. Scott had a modest upbringing in Hollywood. He began as an extra, frequently accepting small, uncredited roles while honing his acting skills. Casting directors quickly took notice of his tall, athletic frame, timeless beauty, and elegant Southern accent. Throughout the 1920s and early 1930s, he was featured in a number of supporting parts and regularly starred in dramas and adventure movies. Randolph Scott, however, discovered his actual identity and home in the Western genre. His early notable Western roles in films like The Last Roundup and The Desperado 1943 demonstrated his innate passion for the genre. With genuineness and subdued intensity, he personified the stoic cowboy hero. As viewers appreciated his honesty, roughness, and subtle acting technique, his reputation expanded over time. Randolph Scott had solidified his position as one of the top stars of the film industry by the late 1930s and early 1940s. Scott added complexity to the Western stereotype, in contrast to many actors who were typecast and restricted to formulaic roles. He was more than just a law enforcement officer or gunslinger. He was frequently presented as a man with a moral compass who was molded by adversity and led by justice. His collaborations with directors like as Henry Hathaway and subsequently Bud Boeter produced some of the most highly regarded westerns in history. Today, movies like Comanche Station 1960, The Tall T 1957, and Ride Lonesome 1959 are regarded as genre classics because these partnerships placed a greater emphasis on human emotion, isolation, and atonement than on gunplay. Scott was able to give performances that were incredibly emotional and contemplative. Although his lengthy and illustrious cinema career frequently eclipsed it, Randolph Scott's personal life was a complex blend of passion, discretion, and steadiness that represented the man himself. Marion DuPont, a woman of exceptional height and self-reliance, was the subject of his first marriage. Marion, an eyes, equestrian, and sportswoman, was born into the illustrious DuPont family of Delaware and inherited the Virginia estate of Montpelier, which had once been the residence of President James Madison. At first glance, Scott and DuPont's 1936 union appeared to be a coupling of sophistication and glitz, a fusion of Hollywood charm and traditional American nobility. Fans of Scott, who was quickly gaining popularity as a Western star, were captivated by the pairing of the attractive, reserved actor with the accomplished horsewoman and dancer. Their wedding received extensive coverage in society pages. But even though they loved and respected each other, their marriage didn't last long. While Scott was becoming more and more enamored with the rigors and routines of his Hollywood job, Marion DuPont's hearts belonged to her horses and her equestrian world. They were two powerful, self-reliant individuals who led very different lives. He was drawn to the bright lights of California, where his career was taking off quickly, while she loved the peace and quiet of Virginia's countryside. managing her stables and raising racehorses. Over time, the geographical and emotional distance widened a gap that neither could heal. The couple separated in 1939 after only 3 years of dating. People who knew them remarked that despite the termination of their marriage, they split up peacefully and without resentment or public scandal. Scott continued to establish himself as one of the most iconic Western heroes of the film industry, while Marion DuPont became one of the most prominent figures in American equestrian sports. Randolph Scott and Patricia Stillman, who would be by his side for the remainder of his life, became lifelong friends 5 years later in 1944. Scott found the stability and warmth he had been looking for in Patricia, who was frequently described as poised, graceful, and committed. In Hollywood, where famous marriages frequently fall apart due to the demands of fame and ongoing scrutiny, their partnership lasted for more than 40 years. Before relocating to Beverly Hills, they settled in Los Angeles and created a peaceful, comfortable existence away from the spotlight. Friends of the couple frequently commented on the love and respect that characterized their marriage, and Scott, who was well known for his gentlemanly manner and reserved disposition, was devoted to Patricia. Scott and Patricia were rarely spotted at the social gatherings and Hollywood parties that other celebrities attended because, despite his popularity, he preferred his solitude. They liked to travel or spend evenings with close friends, entertaining them at home. Their nicely decorated home, which reflected the couple's passion for art, horses, and the American West, became a haven of warmth and friendliness. Scott's marriage to Patricia, who supported him when his career faltered and ultimately came to a stop, was a major factor in his final years of profound contentment. Patricia Stillman became Scott's lifelong lover and partner during the highs and lows of Hollywood life, and the two remained together until his death in 1987. Patricia continued to pay tribute to him after his death, staying mostly out of the spotlight but always talking about her husband's legacy with pride and compassion. Collectively, they exemplified one of the few instances of unwavering love and devotion in the motion picture business. A relationship based on mutual understanding and modest love rather than glitz. A secret that had plagued Hollywood icon Randolph Scott's heart for decades was carried with him into his later years. A secret that was only revealed just before he died. Millions of moviegoers saw Scott as the perfect example of the silent, powerful cowboy, a man of steadfast bravery, tough independence, and stoic dignity. Over the course of his more than 30-year career, he rose to prominence as one of the most well-known figures in the Western genre. However, Scott was a very private man who kept his private life out of the public view behind the scenes, away from the dusty trails and gleaming screens. But his silence said more than words could, and the truth he had been keeping for years eventually started to come to light before he passed away. "People think they know me when they see the cowboy," Scott reportedly admitted to a close friend. "However, the man I see in the mirror is not the same as the man on the television." Simple but eerie, those words exposed a lifetime of inner turmoil. Hollywood studios created plots that would appeal to audiences and conform to the social norms of the time, maintaining a rigid image of their stars for many years. For Scott, that meant living in a world of secrecy and self-control. He was a man divided between the private person he really was and the public person he had to be. Both on and off television, his life turned into a performance, and that emotional load only got heavier as he grew older. Scott's personal life was the subject of incessant rumor during the 1930s and 1940s, especially due to his exceptionally close association with fellow performer Cary Grant. The two lived together in a lavish Santa Monica Beach mansion for almost 12 years. which stoked gossip in the entertainment industry. Some whispered that their relationship went much beyond friendship, while tabloids at the time described them as Hollywood's most odd bachelors. Although Scott never publicly responded to such claims, his kind demeanor and subtle later life admissions seemed to imply that the two men had a close relationship. "Carrie was one of the few people who ever truly understood me," Scott remarked gently at one point. "Together, we chuckled, we quarreled, our dreams were similar. He noticed the true me in a place full of masks." The world had transformed by the 1950s. Scott had done the same. After his stirring 1962 picture, Ride the High Country, he gave up acting. Many commentators praised the performance as a worthy send-off for one of the greatest Western film heroes. But away from the television, he was struggling with years of introspection and loneliness. In 1944, he wed Patricia Stillman, whom he stayed with until his passing. However, by most accounts, their marriage was more about camaraderie than passionate love. Scott got increasingly reflective as he grew older and his health deteriorated, frequently reflecting on his past decisions and long-suppressed feelings. His closest confidants started to discover the truth about his personal grief in these final years. Scott disclosed that he had spent the most of his life living in constant fear of rejection and public condemnation. "It was risky to be different when I was growing up." He acknowledged that you eventually begin to believe the charade yourself after learning to hide and pretend. His tone, which was a mixture of pride and sadness, suggested the severe damage that had been done to him over the years of secrecy. Scott was aware that revealing his actual self could have ruined his career at its peak, because Hollywood's golden period had not been kind to those who ventured outside its tightly defined boundaries. In the 1970s, Scott virtually disappeared from the public eye as his health deteriorated. He was quiet but thoughtful, according to friends, and he would spend many hours gazing out at the California hills that he cherished. Those closest to him saw a sense of calm beginning to replace the stress he had carried throughout his life. Despite the fact that he seldom discussed his history, maybe it was because things had started to change in the world. Hollywood, which had previously repressed him, was suddenly welcoming acceptance, honesty, and individualism. Scott smiled bittersweetly as he hinted at this change in his last interviews. He responded, "Perhaps I was born at the wrong time. However, I'm happy that people can now be who they are. I wish I'd been given that opportunity." Randolph Scott left behind a legacy of cinematic grandeur as well as a life narrative characterized by emotional suffering and quiet resilience when he passed away on March 2, 1987, at the age of 89. Those who knew him well started to reveal the reality he had so carefully concealed in the years after his passing. That a man of tremendous empathy, sensitivity, and thoughtfulness lay behind the renowned cowboy. His agonizing secret was one of grief rather than scandal. The grief of a man who played heroes all his life while secretly longing for acceptance. Randolph Scott's tale serves as a reminder and an homage today. His life exposed the much more nuanced reality of what it meant to be true to oneself in a period when doing so could cost one everything. While his films encapsulated the fabled ideal of the American West, he once remarked, "Having courage is more than merely confronting a shooter on the street. Sometimes you have to face yourself." Ultimately, Randolph Scott's genuine bravery lay not only in his performances, but also in the calm dignity with which he endured the suffering of a secret he would never be able to completely reveal, till the world was at last prepared to comprehend. One of Hollywood's most durable and adored Western stars, Randolph Scott died in 1987 at the age of 89. Leaving a legacy that represented quiet dignity and tough masculinity. Heart and lung problems, which progressively worsened in his final years, were cited as the cause of his death. In Beverly Hills, California, where he had spent a large portion of his life, surrounded by the icons of Hollywood's heyday, Scott passed away quietly. With his death, an era came to an end, and one of the last genuine symbols of the traditional American Western was bid farewell. He had become the epitome of the idealized cowboy hero because, to his rich voice, big stature, and unwavering on-screen persona, and he continued to be respected and admired in the entertainment world well into his twilight years. Randolph Scott was born and raised in Charlotte, North Carolina, and was buried there at Elmwood Cemetery after his passing. His return to his Southern roots was a reflection of the humility that, in spite of his success and celebrity, had always characterized him. North Carolina was more than just his birthplace to Scott. It served as a reminder of his childhood, family values, and work ethic, all of which influenced his outlook on life and his profession. Devoted fans who wanted to honor the man who had played so many stoic heroes on screen made his burial in Charlotte a peaceful place of pilgrimage. For a man who had always valued quiet and seclusion over the clamor of celebrity, the cemetery, covered by towering trees and lined with historical markers, offered a perfectly tranquil final resting place.